Welcome everyone to our Inside the Box lecture series. And as you know, we're studying the performance spaces this semester. I think I would call this the finale. This is our last one, and it promises to be really terrific. Just recall that you went to the Joyce Theater and you looked at a performance space for dance, and then you learned from Jason Carney at Gensler about a new tall building that has multi-purpose performance space. Recall how he had to change the performance space to many different types of venues. And then we had the Rockwell group with Barry Richards, and you learned about set design and some of the places that things that he's designed for Broadway. So today you're going to meet a pianist, an architectural designer, and an acoustician. You know it all, but we'll get there. So I want to tell you a little bit about Steinway Hall. We have better experts than me to tell you about that, but William Steinway started designing pianos in the mid-1800s and did one of the first performance halls in New York City. And you don't think that that would be first. I think this performance hall is maybe the jewel of the building that we're in right now. Because in 1866 on East 14th Street, he built one of the first music halls in New York City for live performance. And of course, it makes sense that you hear a piano in the correct performance space rather than just going someplace and buying a piano and not hearing it played by a good pianist. And so this whole idea kept continuing. The New York Philharmonic used that space until they built Carnegie Hall. And then Steinway Hall moved across the street from Carnegie Hall, which was a marvelous space. And then 5 years ago, they moved here. So in each case, they had a performance area, a concert hall of their own, to appreciate this. So I think you didn't come to a showroom, you came to a performance space. And I think that's important to know. Now we have three very special people who've come to talk to you about this. Lisa Green, who's up front here, from Selldorf Architects, a firm that was started in 1988 by Annabelle Selldorf, and that firm does architecture, interior design, good internship possibilities, and exhibition design. A really great firm that's considered a world-class firm, and did this whole design. Lisa recently worked on a job at the Clark Art Institute, which is at Williamstown. I've been up there, and I haven't been up there since your expansion, but a $145 million project, so it's small, and previously worked for Richard Meyer. Willem, can you raise your hand back there? He's listening. He's going to sit there and listen. Is a senior consultant for 6 years, and he's an expert in acoustics, audiovisual, and theater, and another world-class firm, and has worked collaboratively with Selldorf, Renzo Piano Building Workshop, real big now because Kaiwe came to speak to you all, and Diller Stupidio and Renfro. So we're going to hear about their areas of expertise. I should also say Lisa is a partner at Selldorf. Now, I'm going to introduce you to a very special artist who lets you in the door, Dr. Karen Beluso, and I'm going to read this. Karen Beluso began her piano studies at the age of 6 and made her orchestra debut at the age of 12 with the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra in a performance of Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21 in C major. This led to an appearance with the Brentwood Westwood Symphony Orchestra that was followed by a Carnegie Hall debut with the New York Youth Symphony in a performance of Chopin's Piano Concert No. 2 while still a teenager. She has performed as collaborative and solo artist in Costa Rica, the Philippines, Switzerland, Taiwan, California, Florida, Massachusetts, my state, Missouri, South Carolina, Tennessee, Washington, D.C., all of which earned her accolades for critics and audiences alike. Earning a Bachelor of Music, a Master of Music, a Doctorate of Musical Arts degrees from the Juilliard School. Dr. Beluso has expanded her career to include work in both music education and arts administration, and I would like to present her to you.
Thank you. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all here to Steinway Hall. I am a pianist, as Dr. Bentel read about there, and I'm also the institutional sales manager for Steinway, New York. This is one of my favorite places to be, this particular space. I did work on the 57th Street location for a number of years, and that had the beautiful Beaux-Arts tradition with a hand-painted rotunda as well as that kind of shape. But it's been great to be in this space in Steinway of the current day. What I want you to do is, I'm going to play a piece, and I want you to just close your eyes and listen to what's happening in the space and what your first impressions are, okay? And after that, we'll talk about that, all right? So just, if you want to close your eyes, please do so. Just enjoy the feeling in the space of live music. So, first impressions, okay? The space, live music. Raise your hands. Anybody have a first impression there? Yes?
It's so calming.
Okay, that's a great comment. Willem, our acoustician, this is your first experience hearing a performance in this space, and you just helped to design it. So, what are your?
Well, first of all, thank you for that great performance. That's exactly the same thing I was thinking of, how calm I felt. And I'll try and go into how we tried to create that atmosphere in a little bit. But all that to say, I agree, absolutely.
Any other comments? Yes.
I think that you really hear every note, probably because of the way that the walls are made and everything. You really get the bounce and
Right.
literally hear every key hit.
Exactly. So one of the things as a live performer that has, which is why I love to perform live, is the fact that we also get the feeling of you being in the room, okay? Not only do we hear our sound go out and hopefully bounce back to us, but we also get that feeling. Sometimes, we can call it a warm room. We get that feeling. That allows the artist to expand even more. If you notice at the end, I held that last chord, and technically it's 3 beats, okay? But it was longer than that, okay? Why? Because I was sensing the warmth in the room. Also, the decay of the sound from the piano into the room. These are all things, as I would hope, young designers that you will all consider in working in performing art spaces. We have the wonderful privilege of having 2 people who've worked with this space, so I'm going to actually ask them to talk about what was specific in terms of their work with this space. So, Lisa?
I don't know if my mic is on, but someone will tell me if it isn't. I think you can hear me, but it's about a recording that's being made. In any case, thank you all for coming. So we were tasked with designing the entire space. So as you entered from the street, we created a new staircase, and then coming downstairs. I'll try to focus just a little bit on this room. But in addition to the performance aspects, which Wilhelm will go into in great detail, as architects, we were concerned about how the room feels. Just what does it feel like when you enter? Is it a warm space? Is it a cool space? Is it a beautiful space? Is it a calming space? And throughout the entire Steinway project, from the very beginning, one of the first things we did was we visited the factory, which is still located in Astoria, Queens, where it's been for over 100 years, and it's the most amazing place. And so each piano that you see is handmade by very skilled craftspeople, and each piano takes, I believe, 1 year to complete. And so it has different moments in its process that you see as you tour through the factory. And there were many elements from that very first tour of the factory that stayed with us that we tried to incorporate into the project. So for instance, the floor here is what's called an end grain oak. It's instead of putting a long strip this way, if you put it on its end, it has different load-bearing capacity. So pianos are obviously very heavy, and you can't have them crushing your floors. So the factory has end grain oak, and the building on 57th Street, which was basically 100 years old by the time we came into the project, also had end grain oak. So we wanted to bring that here. And also there are other elements, the color of the seats here, the yellow, which is also used as a flooring material someplace else. That was very specific to our tour of the factory, and we just found these small pieces of suede that are used actually to cover a hammer, where when the key is hit, the hammer hits the wire, I believe. Yes, but this is something that no one sees. It just happens to be yellow. It happens to come from a very specific place. And so that was how we came to pick this color. So it relates to the, again, to the history of craft for the company and their legacy. So we really wanted to carry that legacy forward, but also find a new and very contemporary expression for Steinway as it entered the 21st century, and in this new space, coming from a place that they had occupied for over 100 years.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks everyone for coming. I'll just start by reintroducing myself. My name is Willem Boning. I'm an acoustical consultant, but I come from an architectural background, so I'm very excited to see all of you who are in that field. So I'd like to tell you a kind of story about this room and how it came to be from an acoustical perspective. What my job is to basically design the sound of a room and to work with architects like Annabelle and Lisa and the team at Selldorf to shape the sound of that room as they are determining the materials and as they're determining how this room should feel from a physical, tactile perspective and from a visual perspective. But the way we always start as acousticians is kind of by looking at two things. First of all is, what is the space we've been given? What can we do with the limits on that space, with the box of the room that we're given? And second, what's going to go in that room? And it should seem obvious, but it's not always obvious what's going to go in the room, and there are complexities to that as well. So in this room, not only do we have a piano, but we also have a cinema system. You see the screen drops down over there. There are also surround sound loudspeakers behind all of this black scrim. So it is a multi-purpose room, but this is Steinway, and these are the best pianos in the world, so our primary concern was to make this room sound excellent for a Steinway piano. So one of the first things we do on any project is find out from the client, from the owner, from Steinway, what do you think your room should sound like? And that can often be a difficult conversation because it's much easier to talk about vision than sound. And one of the first things we did is we went to the factory on the factory tour and had conversations with the stakeholders at Steinway. And I have to say it was a little bit frustrating because we thought they would have, we want the room to sound exactly like this. And we tried to tease out of them, what do you want this room to sound like? What do you want the interaction between this instrument, this great instrument, and the room to be? And we never got a really clear answer out of them. But reflecting on it and thinking on it, part of that is because these are the best pianos that have ever been created. There's so much technology and history behind them. And I think what they were really trying to tell us is, don't mess with that sound. Don't embellish it. Don't try to make it sound better than it is. As an acoustician, our job is to embellish the sound of instruments and performers. So, but, we started thinking about what does it mean to not interfere with the sound? Because as a disclaimer, we don't believe that they're perfect acoustics. We won't impose some design upon a client or an architect. We really wanted to know, what does this mean to not interfere with the sound of a Steinway? And there are a few ways that I would interpret that. Number one is you don't want really awful acoustical defects like an echo in the room. You don't want coloration, which means a twanging sound, or you don't want some notes to sound louder than others. Also, you don't want any distracting noises, so you don't want the air conditioning system to rattle or be too loud. You don't want the seats to squeak. You don't want sounds from outside to come in, and you don't really want to hear the subway. More on that later. I'll get back to that, I promise. Another thing about not interfering with the sound is making sure that everyone in the audience can feel close to the instrument. Because this is a showroom, it's not a concert hall, or it is a concert hall in a showroom. And we want people to come here and feel like they get a sense of what does this instrument sound like. So it's not really so much about the room, because you can't take the room home. But you can take this home. And that's what you want people to come into this room and come away with. The last thing, which I know, Karen, you began to bring up, is about the performer. in the room. And there's a relationship between the performer and the instrument that's incredibly important. And a big part of that is we want performers to come into this room and be able to explore and communicate the full range of the piano. And Steinways, if you've ever had the pleasure of listening to a Steinway side by side with other instruments, there is an incredibly expressive range across the Steinway that changes a little bit from the bottom to the top of the piano. If you play on a Yamaha concert grand, it's much more even and kind of neutral in tone color, which is why jazz musicians, some jazz musicians, not all of them, prefer Yamaha. Many prefer Steinway also, to be diplomatic. And if you've ever had the pleasure of playing a Steinway, you realize that it responds to your touch in a way that's different than any other piano. And look at the size of this. This is a huge machine in a small room, and we wanted to make sure that every person playing it feels liberated to explore its dynamic range, the absolute most quiet notes you can play and the loudest notes you can play, without getting scared that you're overpowering people in the audience. If any of you have ever played in a pop band or rock music or rapped or anything like that, and you've been on stage with a stage monitor, you will know that that stage monitor has to be at the right level for you to know whether you're communicating to your audience. So we wanted to make sure that performers in this room felt I can play the quietest note I want, and I can play the loudest note I want, and not feel censored, by the room. So that was kind of my interpretation of what it means to not interfere. So next I'll talk about the room that we were given and the space we were given and compare that to the old Steinway Hall. So we knew there were issues with the old Steinway Hall being a very big, boomy, reverberant space. We came into the project when the site had already been selected and the general area for the room had been selected, and we had a kind of dilemma that we were facing. One of the things we love as acousticians is height in rooms. There's so much you can do with a really tall room, and this is not particularly tall. It's not terribly short, but it's not terribly tall either. And we had a choice to make, and the choice was between taking out about 1.5 feet of height in this room to float an inner box in the outer box on springs so that you wouldn't hear any subway noise, or bringing that ceiling, but the consequence of that would be that if you brought that ceiling down really low, it might feel a bit claustrophobic, and it would constrain the performer from really exploring the dynamic range of the instruments. So we had a choice between kind of being like a caged tiger or being unleashed and being occasionally interrupted by a bit of subway noise. So from what you heard in the performance, you should be able to guess which decision we took. But we didn't take this lightly. We understood, first of all, you're in New York, and if you go to Carnegie Hall, you hear the subway there too. And as you can imagine, many of the people who come here to Steinway Hall also go to Carnegie Hall. So it's about kind of an expectation there. And, if we were in Winnipeg, let's say where I'm from, which doesn't have a subway system, it would be probably pretty disturbing to someone if they heard a rumbling noise once in a while. I mean, we just don't have a lot of things underground. So we made that decision, and this is my first time listening to the room. And you notice it the first time, but I think you get used to it. And what we really wanted to ensure was that you have a big kind of spacious sound in here that doesn't clamp down on the performer, and I think we have succeeded there. I'm not sure if you were trying to blow the rafters off, but
Not today.
But I guess I'll field this question to you, Karen, is how do you determine the kind of dynamic range of a piece that you're playing, given the instrument you're on and the space you're in, and were you thinking about that today?
Well, I know this space really well, so I live here practically, so I know what the piano is capable of doing as well as this space. Now, keep in mind, as performers, we don't have the luxury of practicing in a space like this all the time. So where am I practicing? In my living room, which is probably equivalent to the size of a practice room, okay, with a small grand. So there are two things that I have to, envision. One, I'm playing on a piano half this size, so the volume is going to be less, right? And then also, again, the dimensions of the room are much smaller, plus I have carpeting and a couch, so that soaks up sound. When I come into a space like this, and I loved your analogy there about kind of like the caged tiger, that's how I feel at home. And when I come here, I know that I can then, kind of let loose and explore. This space is so wonderful for allowing that. And like I said, I could hear things here, and I could get the feel of the room, if you want a space that's warm as you enter, okay? And the feeling in here, then it allows me to kind of play a little bit with what I want to do dynamically or what I want to do musically in a phrase, okay? And I know that really sounds kind of like off in left field, but if you think of it just as a painter or a sculptor, as they're molding their, their painting or their clay, that's what I'm hoping to do at the piano, and hopefully send that experience to you, okay? That's what our jobs are as performing artists. And like I said, this is such a great space for piano. Just so you know, we can fit 3 of these here. Okay, so they can fit 3 Model Ds.
We were designing for 2.
Yeah. Oh, I wasn't supposed to tell you that.
No,
But
give me a call.
But the interesting challenge is when we have the 2 pianos and they're going at the same time. That's a lot of sound, but it's never overpowering. So.
That's a great segue also, because I'm finally going to tell you something about the actual design of the room and some of the things you can't see in it. So one of the things we look to is historical precedent. What kind of rooms have been designed like this in the past? And there weren't actually a lot of rooms that have this kind of wide and short aspect ratio to it. Many of the palace music rooms where secular classical music really evolved are quite lofty in space. And besides, they weren't playing on Steinway Ds. They were playing on harpsichords and clavinets and all these other instruments. So we actually looked to the history of the opera house, actually, in this room. And there's this one opera house, and I'm going to show a photo of it here. This is the theater in the Schloss Schwetzingen Palace, which was the summer residence of the Mannheim court, big music lovers. And the interesting thing about this room is, by conventional acoustical standards, it should sound terrible. It's extremely dry. There's very little reverberation or that dying away of sound. But it's incredibly intimate, and it's because of all of these balcony fronts, which reflect the sound from the performer back down to the audience. And so what it sounds like in there is like you're right next to the musician in their living room. And it's a bit creepy because this room is much larger, and you feel like they're whispering into your ear or something. So we looked at this because we knew we weren't going to be able to get a long reverberation time, but we did want to create that sense of intimacy. And we also, at Arup, at our company, we'd experimented with this model a little bit. So the first experiment we did was with an outdoor music venue. And we have no reverberation outside because the sound bounces back to you and then vanishes. And we managed to achieve the effect of that opera theater outside by creating this kind of halo above people's heads that would catch the sound and send it back down. The next place we implemented that was actually in another basement, like this one, at a preschool in Montreal, where the concern was making sure all the kids who were playing their Orff instruments and violins wouldn't be too loud to drive their parents running and screaming from the venue. It's a really amazing project. It's by the Symphony Orchestra of Montreal in one of the most economically deprived parts of Montreal to give intensive music education to kids. So what we wanted to do is the same thing there, is we wanted to keep a halo of sound coming down to people to amplify and make the parents feel close to their kids, and to give the kids some responsiveness to the room, as Karen was pointing out, but also make sure it didn't get too loud in there. So it's a bit hard to see, but the entire center of the ceiling in that room is just cheap sound-absorbing ceiling tile that you see in your office. You probably have it in some of your classrooms at SVA. And the entire outer boundary is hard reflecting gypsum board. And so if you look up above your heads, there's a clue. It's not entirely visible, but we did the same pattern in this room. So everywhere where you see continuous wood, that is a hard sound reflecting surface that takes the sound of the piano and bounces it back down to you. And everywhere you see this subtle piano key pattern of openings in the ceiling, there is sound absorbing finish, a kind of batt insulation that's painted black behind that. So all the sound that goes straight up there doesn't come back. All the sound that hits the corners of the room comes back to you and makes you feel closer to the instrument. So that does two things. One is it allows the performer to get louder and really explore the top end of the dynamic range so it doesn't blow your ears out. And also having that sound coming from the sides, the upper sides, makes the piano feel closer to you, which is almost, you could call it an acoustical illusion. If we'd flipped the script there and kept the outer boundary sound absorbing and made the center of the ceiling sound reflecting, you would feel that sound bearing down on you, and it would make you feel a bit claustrophobic in the space. So it really does matter where those finishes go and where those reflections come from. I think we've already kind of talked about the subway. One last thing about how we could have designed this room differently is called a box-in-box construction, which means we literally take an inner box, put it on springs, and don't structurally connect it at all to the outer box that the room is in. And that basically prevents any sound and vibration from outside from getting in. But it takes up a lot of space, it takes up a lot of money, and it's quite difficult. It can be difficult to maintain as well, especially if your standard New York contractor starts throwing garbage in there as they're building it. So these are all things that we think about as acousticians. We never get a blank slate to work with, and we try and do the best we can to develop a unique acoustical signature that really matches the needs of our client. So that's what we tried to do. And it was a real pleasure to hear it in concert for the first time ever today. So thank you so much, Karen. And thank you so much, Lisa, for working with us and allowing us to work with you on this just fantastic space.
So I'm going to play one more piece for y'all. And it's a very different style to kind of put the piano through its paces a little bit, and also for you to experience, if you wouldn't mind, something different. Okay. And then after that, we'll have time for questions. My pleasure, my pleasure.
Oh, my, we're so lucky with all of you. It's great. So now we're going to open it up to you for some questions. Hal is first. We have the mic.
Excuse me. I do have some question about acoustic. Should I bring the mic?
Yeah, so we can all hear it.
Report or
That's just for amplification, so, yeah.
I just have a question about acoustic design.
Is it on?
Performance area.
You have to turn it on. Push the button up.
There you go. All right, there you go.
So I do have a question about acoustic design performing space. I'd like to raise an example first. Zaha Hadid, she did an opera house in China, which she didn't use large sound boxes, but she separated small, like hundreds of small sound boxes, and she made it look like a embrace form that embraced the audience, and she also turned it into decoration pieces, so that makes the space very organic and unite. I wonder if that there's a typical, are there any list of typical acoustic design strategy in your career? And also I like to ask, how do we determine which strategy do we use? Is the musician or the performing type or the scale of the room? And also during design process, when is the time to combine acoustic what's your career? I'm sorry, I don't know how to say, but interior designer and acoustic consultant, how to combine their idea together?
That's a great question. And it really varies. There's a kind of what I would love answer and what usually happens answer. And the what I would love answer is on every project to be collaborating through the whole process with the architect, with the owner, with the interior designer. Because at every stage of the process, there are always things that you can collaborate on to ensure the success of the project. The first thing you have to do is capture space, and that's the first thing we tried to do on this project. We fought for every inch of height that we could after we had made that decision. And that's a decision that has to be made with the architect, with the owner, potentially with the structural engineer as well, if they're pouring a slab somewhere. And it's typically more towards the end of the process that we begin to work with interior designers. But one of the things, as you mentioned, that Zaha Hadid was really amazing at doing was uniting very large-scale gestures with very small-scale gestures. And it's really valuable, I think, at the beginning of the process also to start talking about what kind of chair do you want, what kind of material do you want in the chair, because it does filter into the overall design and into some of the acoustical properties. So for example, this chair design we worked with Selldorf on. We wanted to know how much it would absorb sound, and we were able to work back and forth over the course of the design process to do that.
There's an anecdote I just want to quickly share, because these these chairs are first of all beautiful, and they serve the space perfectly. But coming from the performer's standpoint, the great actress Celeste Holm said to me once, we were playing in a ballroom, which, by the way, is the worst place to ever do a performance in, like a hotel ballroom. Please don't ever book a performance there. It's horrible, because it's not designed for that, But anyway, so you often have the galas happening there, and they will have performances. So we went there, and we were in rehearsal, and it was a stage, and we couldn't hear the chamber music going on that we were playing. We couldn't hear each other because the sound was going out but never coming back. So we couldn't tell if I was playing too loud, if they weren't playing enough and things like that. And we were rather upset. We were young performers. And Celeste Holm was the MC. And she comes over and she says, we were frustrated, and she says, "Oh, darling, don't worry." She said, "When people come in, they'll sit in those big fluffy chairs, they'll soak up sound, and they'll take up all the oxygen, so don't worry about it." So again, these are all things you have to consider in terms of designing a performing space or something that's multi-purpose. Really down to the infinite detail. It makes our lives as performers much better. We enjoy the experience better, and then in the end, you will too as the audience. So, but anyway, any other questions?
is the sound relates more on the form of the room, like the shape of the room, or the material that made of the room?
So it relates to both, and there's an interesting kind of history of that. There was one person who is known as the kind of great grandfather of room acoustic science, Wallace Sabine. And he came up with a formula for reverberation time, which is how long a sound takes to die away. And it was really liberating to architects, because he basically said all you have to do is make sure you have the right amount of soft material in a room. As long as you meet that amount of soft material, you're going to be able to hit this acoustical target. And that's why up to the 1960s, you see a huge variety of room shapes, including many that sounded terrible. And it was only in the 1960s when an acoustician from New York, from Boston, went and did a tour of concert halls all around the world to prepare for the construction of what is now called David Geffen Hall, when there was a realization in the scientific community that shape does matter a lot. And if you remember me talking about where that sound is coming from in that room, it's been discovered over time that it really does matter if the sound is coming from the sides or if it's coming from above or behind you. So in the design process, we start to think about shape at the earliest. After we've captured our room volume, we then think about the shape. And then more towards the end, we begin to think about materials. But to us, or to me, I'll speak for myself, not for the whole acoustics community, I only care about one thing, which is how much sound does it absorb and how much sound does it reflect. I don't care if it's wood, I don't care if it's concrete, I don't care if it's formica, I don't care if it's diamond. All I care about is its acoustical properties. So that gives you, as interior designers, a heck of a lot of flexibility also. And architects, a whole lot less flexibility.
I just want to add one thing. This is the first project we completed with Arup. We had worked with them on the study for an auditorium that was a multi-purpose room that didn't go ahead, and we're currently working with them on a large auditorium that's going to be at the Frick Collection, which we're renovating, in a brand new space. I think it's really important. It was a very important question because I think we have to work together, and we have learned a tremendous amount from Arup through the process. So even that first auditorium that didn't get built.
The Choate Auditorium.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that educated us a lot on a number of these issues about shape and proportion of the space and those things. So I think that with all of your, if you will, technical consultants or collaborators, same thing with lighting, the more time you spend with them, the more you learn, and it can be an integrated process. And I think that that's what's really important.
So for your acoustic walls that surround these three walls and then that are on the back of the room for the reflection of sound, how did you decide the angles and like the preciseness of it? Is there a precise way that each panel is? Was it some type of standardized set that you kind of came up with and then turned over time along the wall? Was there any method to that?
So you noticed.
Oh, yeah.
The answer is it's a secret. No, I'm joking. So remember I was talking earlier about acoustical defects. And I never like starting a project thinking about acoustical defects. I like thinking about how are we going to make it sound great. But one thing we always want to prevent in a room is something called a flutter echo. And it's a bit of a misnomer because you don't hear so much bing, boom, bing, boom, bing, boom. You hear a coloration in the sound. So when you play a note on a piano, it has a natural coloration, which means, you have a, I think you're the better educator than I am, Karen, but you have a fundamental frequency to a note. That's the note that it's like,
When you first strike
yeah,
the key,
this
you
is,
get one note versus
this is a middle C, but what you're actually hearing when you play that is all of these overtones, right? So what you don't want to hear is the room highlight one of those overtones. So the reason that we have these angled panels on the front and the back and on the sides of the stage is so that no one frequency gets trapped bouncing back and forth, which would disturb the performer, would again kind of clamp down on their ability to be expressive. And you notice that we don't have it anywhere else. And that's purely because there is no path for sound to bounce back and forth hundreds of times, creating that coloration. The pattern, actually, this is a good example of how we worked with Selldorf. And you know, we worked with them on the material, the finish, how we wanted it to look, and we basically just gave them almost like a crossword puzzle, like a matrix that was color-coded. And I just kind of went one by one through each square to make sure that there was enough variation between them to prevent that flutter echo from occurring.
So they are extremely like precise to the point, basically.
Yes and no. I mean, you'll notice also this is like 10 degrees, this angle.
Well, right, like
There is no consensus in the acoustical community on exactly what that angle should be, partially because it depends on the frequency of the sound. High sounds respond more to very slight changes in angle, and low sounds less. So,
And I think to add to that, like it can never be, the room can never be tuned for just one thing, right? So
That's
there
right.
could be a jazz pianist in here, or you know, or classical, and different levels of that. So I mean, I think you create a sort of standard or ideal, and then you accept a level of variation, you know, within that too.
and it's not to say that we're accepting compromise. You know, in the good old days of the 1960s and 70s, when multi-purpose halls were popping up everywhere, compromise was the kind of solution, which is partially why all these halls sound bad for everything. Very often, it will sound better for everything if you don't compromise and if you find a way of allowing each of those functions to really shine. And this is what we're doing actually at the Frick Collection, that we made a decision with Selldorf not to put a whole bunch of curtains in, not to perforate and have stuff behind the surfaces. We found a way, and we're confident it will work, of making it really great for speech and really great for music all at once.
And one of the other things, just in terms of the piano itself, although every Steinway is made by the same formula, you know, with the same specifications, you know, there are slight deviations in it. So there might be, for example, another Model D that you know, tends to favor certain overtones more than others, that you'll hear, you know, the most trained ear will hear. So, you know, again, you have to be able to try and do the best possible scenario and kind of work with that, because you know, with the handcrafted instruments, you're going to find slight variations.
And you want to hear those too,
Yeah,
I think,
and in
space
some
as a
instances,
performer,
yeah,
as an
exactly.
audience.
But you know, others may be more sensitive to, you know, certain pianos may be more prone to that. You know, so it's all, you know, you try to do the best that you can. You know.
I think we could do one more question, but I have a question about the layout and how you put a piano in a space.
Okay, so we discussed this yesterday. All right, so I don't know if some of you saw, this lid was down when you first came in, right? Okay, so the sound is a little more muffled, okay? If I were to play here, so, right? You heard that same opening, okay? So now, okay, thank you. So what this allows, there you go. Okay.
A little heavier than expected.
But it is poplar, 5-ply core construction. I'll give a factory tour another time. So what this allows is for the sound to go out. Okay, I'm using the same amount of pressure. All right, this piano should be able to cut through an orchestra without any amplification. It cuts through in outdoor venues as well. Okay, so you want to make sure that the lid faces out to the people hearing it. Please don't face it to the wall. I can't tell you how many designs I've seen.
Even if it's in a rendering.
Yes,
Especially
exactly.
if
In your
it's in a
renderings,
rendering.
please. You know, I'm not at all involved in design that way, but because I sell pianos, and then they say, we want this piano here, and I'm looking at it going, you're facing it the wrong way, first of all. Second of all, allow enough space for the person to sit. Okay? Like 2 feet maybe? You know, I've seen designs where they literally had the wall right next to it, and I'm like, well, you've given me about this much space. All right? No joke. please. Willem can come up with his list of, pet peeves that way. So just remember, the lid should open towards your audience, okay? And also that leave space for the performer, okay? We do have
remember one thing.
Yes, exactly. If you take away one thing. We also have CAD drawings, so if you ever need them for any of our sizes, I've got them. All right.
So one more question over there.
For acoustical purposes, when is it appropriate to use kind of like slits like this for acoustics compared to like an extruded baffle?
Another good question. Well, one of the reasons it's appropriate to use this is because it looks good in the space. It's a lot harder to get a custom wood assembly right than off-the-shelf baffle. But I think it's all doable. It's not. I don't mean to be dismissive of your question at all. What I mean to say is I think that you need to spend a lot more time on detailing a system like this. I'm struggling with the same thing myself on an airport project right now, where acoustics are not just a matter of audience satisfaction, it's a matter of life and death, because we have to make sure that our emergency evacuation system can be heard and understood. And the architects on that project are pushing back a little bit more than we would like. But in the industry, so to speak, you have to be constantly balancing, thinking with an eye to the architect and what they want aesthetically, with an eye towards cost. This is definitely more expensive than putting some acoustic ceiling tile in here. And then to the technical side of it as well. But it's rare that we're able to sort of just put our noses down as acousticians and only think about that.
I just want to add one thing, so we're wrapping up. As you leave and you go through the space, I would encourage you to notice the ceiling upstairs. Mm-hmm. So that is sort of a decorative ceiling that we designed as a custom design. It has a piano curve, which is, obviously referencing what is going on in the building, but it also has acoustical properties. So by putting that ceiling in, we were improving the acoustics on the upper level, where in the initial planning we thought there may be a bit more piano playing going on, actually from people who are shopping for pianos, or an occasional, not full-blown concert, but some sort of performance, right. And also just noise for people in the space, so that it would be comfortable for just normal day-to-day, conversation and day-to-day work. So that ceiling was another big kind of acoustical aspect of the entire project.
There's also a Spencer Finch sculpture above the stair that I think is really quite nice. You should recognize as you go up.
Yeah, so that was custom commissioned for the space, and it's based on a piece of music on Goldberg's Variations, and Spencer's an artist who works a lot with issues of light, as well as the temporal qualities of sound.
That's great. Well, some people may still be around for questions. I think we're going to have to stop. We still have a prize to give out for questions. But a huge round of applause for us.